using these. Okay.
Okay, I guess we'll introduce it. We'll just introduce ourselves, Jeffrey.
Sure. Just give me 1 second. Okay. I I'm Jeff Weiss. I am a professor at New York Law School. Am I coming across? Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Very good.
Okay. So much for the good new headphones. Great. I have been working on redistricting at the state, local, and national level for quite some time. When I was working in the state assembly back in 1980, it was my job to broker the loss of 5 congressional seats after the 1980 census, and I've lasted a number of years to still be working on it today. In the last 3, 4 years, I've directed the New York Census and Redistricting Institute at New York Law School, where we provide information and guidance and resources on redistricting in the census. I've worked in a number of counties, towns, and cities across the state the last few years. And back in 2020, I was quite active working through the local United Way on North Country census outreach efforts. So I have familiarity with the region. And I thought I would use some time this evening to discuss redistricting at the city level with you.
Okay, well, let's,
I'm Dean Schneller. I'm the city attorney. I'm over here.
I'm Jeff Moore.
I'm Jennifer
Cat
Kelly.
City Council.
I'm Jennifer Kelly, Ward 4 City Councilor.
I'm Elizabeth Gibbs, I'm Ward 3 City Councilor.
Jacob Avery, Ward 2 City Councilor.
And Julie Bond, Ward 1 City Councilor.
And I'll jump in and say, I'm Alexis Marking. I'm from Plattsburgh. My mom lives on the base. My dad lives in West Shazy. And I currently work as a research assistant for Professor Weiss at the New York Census and Redistricting Institute. I go to law school in New York City.
Well, you're chairing the meeting, Jeff,
You're
so
chairing the meeting.
take it away.
Well, did you want to give us a little overview?
Sure. What I wanted to do was let you know some of the major points about redistricting and how it's done, why it's done, the purposes of it. Going back to the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 calls for a decennial census. And fast forwarding 200 years, the U.S. Supreme Court has read that to mean that every legislative body in the United States, from Congress down to town boards, any body that elects legislators from districts needs to redraw district boundaries once every 10 years. It's called the one person, one vote doctrine. The Supreme Court set these rules back in the early 1960s. So that is the predominant guiding force behind redistricting. I'll just mention also, redistricting is the actual redrawing of district boundaries within the jurisdiction. Reapportionment, another often used phrase, is simply the reallocation of congressional districts among the 50 states based on population gains or losses. So I'm going to be using the phrase redistricting. They're often interchangeable, but just wanted to make mention of that. In New York, there are several laws that guide redistricting. The most important is the state's municipal home rule law that was revised in 2021 to require that all governments in New York State, cities, towns, counties, all have to redistrict based on census data that creates districts of equal population, that respects minority voting rights, that looks at districts that are compact in shape, contiguous in how they're drawn, so that you can travel from one part of a district to another and never leave it. That districts take into consideration where it's appropriate minority voting rights. That districts also be drawn with communities of interest in mind. Communities of interest being like-minded socioeconomic, religious, educational, medical, any kind of a community where residents believe that they have shared interests. And the courts have also ruled that after the census is taken and the data is reported to the states, that the district boundaries be drawn before the next election. So if the data comes out in 2021 and that the next election is in 2022, new lines have to be drawn in time for the 2022 election. That's why New York ended up with a rush process in 2022 at the state level after the state commission imploded. A court ended up drawing New York's congressional and state Senate lines in order to have a new map in place for the 2022 election. Last week, the ongoing saga eventually ended with a state legislative drawn map for the congressional districts. Another factor I forgot to mention on the criteria, because I know it's an important issue, at least in parts of Clinton County, if not the city of Plattsburgh, is that you have to take into account prisoner reallocation data, that incarcerated individuals are counted for the purposes of redistricting at their homes of record prior to incarceration, so that if you have, let's just say, an incarcerated person from Clinton County who is serving time in Attica in Erie County, that person is subtracted from the census data in Erie County and added to the census block of her or his known residence back in Clinton County. This is done statewide, so that if you have a state prison facility nearby, those individuals residing there, incarcerated there, are subtracted from the redistricting data numbers. And similarly, incarcerated persons who come from the county but are being housed elsewhere are put back into the county for the purposes of redistricting. I know that the city charter requires a commission, that a process be followed. But after reading some press clips about the situation, I got in touch with you and suggested that if I could be helpful in helping guide you through this process, I'd be delighted to do so, or at least to answer any questions. Nearly every county, city, and township across the state has completed the redistricting process. I'm still working in Orange County because their county legislature isn't up for re-election until 2025. Similarly, in Allegheny County, they're just getting started. But for the most part, the state, county, city processes are already behind us. And this being an election year, local governments that are still having off-year elections this year have redrawn their district boundaries. The downside of not having done this is that you open up the city to liability in either state or federal court should somebody challenge the failure to redistrict, and absent any unique circumstances, a court is not going to generally allow more time, again, but depending on the calendar and what's going on. So that's essentially the message I wanted to give you. I'd be glad to answer any questions or engage in any kind of conversation you'd like to have.
Jeff, how are you going to run this meeting? Do you want us to address you? Do you want?
No,
You're chairing the meeting.
I think we should just, as we think of any questions, we should just ask them as we go. I mean, being cognizant of everybody needs a chance to speak.
I have,
So-
can I go then? I have a question. Jeffrey, you say that, not passing the redistricting opens the city for liability. What kind of liability are you talking about? Lawsuits? Is that what you mean?
No,
Or
we would basically,
fines?
not a fine. The liability is basically that if a court finds that the city has not followed the one person, one vote doctrine and the municipal home rule law, a court would generally give you a period of time in which to develop a new plan, subject probably to court review. And further failure to do so would result in most cases, having the court itself draw the plan. That almost happened in Ulster County last year when the legislature created a new map but didn't follow the new state criteria. And the court gave the county a few months to draw a plan, and literally at the 11th hour, they decided to come together and draw the map subject to the court's approval. But the court was almost ready to appoint what they call a special master to do the line drawing for them. That's also what happened at the New York State Congressional and Senate level 2 years ago, where there just wasn't enough time before the 2022 election cycle was to get underway, that a state judge in Steuben County, at the direction of the State Court of Appeals, retained a special master, an individual with background in this kind of work, to draw the congressional and state Senate map.
I guess I'm having a little trouble.
Yeah, Jeffrey, we're having a hard time hearing you. Once you put your headphones on, it became more difficult for us to hear you.
Is this any better?
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, again, first time, lesson learned, keep the microphone directly at your mouth. Okay, so what I was saying is that if you don't redistrict in time, and somebody, and any voter, any resident in the city who finds themselves underrepresented based on taking the new census data, overlaying it on the current district boundaries, and finding that they are that they are underrepresented, can bring a lawsuit in state or federal court. There's no fine for not redistricting, but generally what a judge would do is give you additional time to enact a plan depending on the time frame. If you don't enact a plan before the deadline, then the court would step in and draw a plan for you. They use a person referred to as a special master, an individual retained by the court with expertise in line drawing, and she or he would draw the map subject to the court's approval. And that's what happened 2 years ago when the state legislature, the state process, ran out of time, and the judge in Steuben County, at the direction of the State Court of Appeals, went ahead and retained an expert, Dr. Jonathan Servais from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, to draw the state's congressional and state Senate lines, which were under attack in court.
So Jeffrey, circling back to something you said earlier about passing the legislation to redistrict and then trying to put that into action the following year. Has that been the typical case where the redistricting would have been passed by the legislative body and then it would go into effect the following calendar year? Is that how it is?
Well, it's supposed to go into effect after the census data is reported to the state. In the normal situations, the census is taken in the first year of the decade. The census data is delivered to the state at the block level by race, by ethnicity, at the local, by almost the precinct level, by April in the year ending in 1. Things were delayed this year. The data, because of the pandemic, didn't get sent to the states until September 2021. But the goal is that you use the period of time between receipt of the census data and the beginning of the petitioning process to redraw the lines. So a great number of municipalities use the time from September 2021 until the spring of 2022 to draw their district boundaries. If the next election wasn't until, let's say, 2023 or 4 or 5, you had some more time. So essentially in 2022, very few counties had elections that year. It was mostly Congress and the state legislature. the vast number of localities across the state drew their district boundaries in 2022, early 2023. And now very few counties, I'm working on Orange County, where their first election is going to be in 2025. They all have 4-year terms, so they weren't under the gun to get this done quickly. So because Plattsburgh has elections in, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020, you have elections in 2024?
Yes, we have 3.
Yes.
Yeah, for those districts, the lines should be drawn, because if you don't draw them, nothing's going to happen automatically. Someone's got to go to court. These lawsuits don't happen by themselves, but a voter with standing, meaning that any city resident who can show that they are underrepresented based on the 2020 census data, would have standing to challenge a map in court
So we
and
need to
most
know-
likely prevail.
So it's a calculation, so it's not an automatic challenge. It requires a lack of equal protection under the Constitution. It's not one person, one vote. That could allow for a challenge. So it depends on the numbers. It's a number-specific analysis if there was a challenge.
Is that correct, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I had a little bit of a hard time hearing.
And Dean, you don't have a microphone with you.
Yeah.
I was saying it's a number-specific analysis whether there's an equal protection violation. So the data we've seen is that, we're striving for less than a 5% standard deviation from the median adjusted population within the various ward boundaries.
Yeah, the population standard, I neglected to mention this, changed from previous decades. It changed in the state law enacted in 2021, whereas you used to you were held to a standard where the size of the smallest to the largest district couldn't exceed 10% overall. Now you're required to draw districts that fall within a 5% window, where the size of the largest to smallest district can't exceed 5%, or just as an example, let's say minus 2.5% and plus 2.5%. So it's not a 5% difference from the average population. It's within 5% of the size of the largest to smallest district. So it could be minus 2.5 plus 2.5, or minus 4 plus 1, etc.
So the Councilor, your question, I think, was, is there a firm deadline for the 2024 election? And it was our understanding that February 15th was that deadline, which was why there was a push in early 2024 to get this approved in time, because there was an opportunity to file a petition for a referendum, which gaming that out meant there was an April 1st hard deadline. So we were aiming for a February 15th deadline to comply with the state statute. So having missed that, it's my understanding that there cannot be any redistricting that could take effect at this point moving forward until we get to the point. But that could take effect for the 2024 election cycle.
Well, right now, the void you're facing is that you are literally behind schedule, that the election calendar for 2024 is already underway for the primary for petitioning. So, it's only if somebody steps forward and brings a lawsuit, then it's going to be up to a judge to decide whether to delay city elections, or one possibility could be, and this often happens, but not always, is to allow one election to take place this year under the old map, but run again next year in 2025, and then catch up with the schedule after that date.
So, we never voted on it. We had a discussion about it. We had another special meeting to discuss it, where we invited the commissioners from the Board of Elections here, but we never actually voted on the redistricting at all. The document, the resolution was, the local law was pulled from the agenda. Where does that leave us? So we never voted on it at all.
You're really,
Sorry, just to add to that, though, there was a district commission formed last year. The numbers, the analysis was done, the maps were redrawn, the local law was presented, and at that point, that was pulled by the council. So it wasn't
Pulled
just
by
a
the
resolution.
mayor, wasn't pulled by the council. So we never actually voted on it, Jeffrey. How
Right.
does that affect what happens next?
I would
I
suggest,
think that analysis has been done.
yeah, I would suggest at this point you proceed with the election using the lines that were drawn a decade ago, and barring anybody stepping forward to challenge that, where I think the worst that can happen is that you're directed by a court to get to work rather quickly and draw a plan. And if you don't draw a plan, the court will do it for you. And then to see what whether the court would want to order an election next year, so you'd be elected this year under the old map for a 1-year term. That could happen. But again, I have to be hypothetical here because there's no lawsuit pending.
No, there isn't.
And the deviations, we're not talking big numbers, we're talking dozens or hundreds of people, not thousands or millions of people. So the standard deviations range, percentage points. It's not a wide gap, I guess.
Well, being technical about it, if you take the 2020 census data and overlay it on the current districts, and that shows that none of your current districts exceed the 5% window, then you don't have to redistrict. But as soon as any one district falls outside of that 5% window, that's where the challenge develops.
So my, one of my other questions, I'm talking.
No,
no. I don't want to dominate the conversation in case somebody else wants to chime in, but, one of the questions that I have, is the charter makes it clear on the commission has to be formed and it's presented to us to vote on. But I guess one thing that I am not clear on is if the council does not agree with the redrawn boundaries, even though the redrawn boundaries may have fallen within that numerical calculation that is appropriate for the redistricting law, if the council doesn't agree with the plan, do we have, we have to vote on it, do we have a right to say no and then ask that commission to do the work again? Do we have that right as a council?
Well, if the map that's drawn for you is rejected, but the current districts are within population compliance, you wouldn't be required to do anything. What's contemplated is that every 10 years, the numbers have changed enough that it requires a line redrawing. And you might want to redraw lines to, let's say, keep communities of interest together. You might want to redraw district lines if some unique event or housing development was built in the last decade, and you want to better reflect population shifts in a map. But technically, unless you've got a minority voting rights violation, which I don't believe Plattsburgh has the population to reach that level, you don't have to redraw the districts. Let me ask, do you know whether the current districts fall within 5% from the size of the smallest to the largest using the 2020 census data?
I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but some do and some don't. But
As soon as if some don't, that's where you do need to redistrict.
And so the redistricting that did occur wasn't just based on the 5%, it was based on that continuity of the existing map, geographic, natural boundaries, communities of interest, and actual changes. I don't know if there was ever overlaid for that and attend one special meeting, but the changes were 2 or 3 blocks that were different. It was not a drastic change. We did have some more green in Ward 3 because of the Reeves Lane annexation parcel.
Yeah.
But if those were census blocks that had 0 population.
So
the
my
actual population changes were very discrete.
So my question though is, I understand all those things. My question is, if the council does not agree with the work that the commission did, we have to vote yes or no, which implies to me, we have the legal right to say no and direct the commission to go back and do the work again. And I need your legal opinion on that. Can the council, if they disagree with the work that the redistricting commission did, because, maybe we have some things in there that we are not comfortable with or unhappy about, or we don't agree with. Is that our right, and can we direct that commission to go back and do the work again?
Well, I don't have the city charter in front of me. Does the charter say anything about what happens if the commission plan is rejected, or is the city charter silent on that?
It's silent.
Well, this is one of the issues we find when people draft things that don't think through the possible controversial consequences. Generically speaking, if the commission recommends a plan that's rejected, in a practical sense, a court would generally allow the legislature to draw a plan, because you could have a situation where a commission could be tasked with 10 plans, all of them are rejected, and it never ends. So using common sense and common law, the court would generally allow the legislature to draw a plan, and failing anybody drawing a plan, then the court has every right to do a new plan, draw the new plan itself.
You say the court, what court are we talking about?
You'd file a complaint in state Supreme Court as you would any kind of a civil action. That case could be appealed to the appellate division and then to the state court of appeals. You could also file a challenge in the Northern District federal court alleging a one-person, one-vote violation. So you could go to either court. State court is faster, cheaper, more expedient. Federal court is expensive and time-consuming.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand correctly. This governing body could reject, because we never voted on it, we could reject the commission's work and create the redistricting ourselves. Is that what you're saying we could do?
I'm suggesting that is a likely outcome if the council consistently or decidedly rejects a map submitted by the commission, in part because the city charter is silent about a failed commission effort.
I would add that though it's not just a free blank slate, the same analysis that the commission applied, this body would have to apply, otherwise that would also be subject to challenge. So you need to fit the math criteria, the natural boundaries, the natural neighborhoods, the equity and fairness criteria. The same criteria would apply regardless of yours.
Right, I understand that.
If I may jump in for a minute, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but you could also, because it's silent in the charter, if you held a vote and voted no on a plan that the commission had suggested and you brought forth for a vote, you could also submit amendments, suggested amendments of what you don't like about that plan, but still leave it in the hands of the commission to then make those alterations to it. And then the commission could submit a new plan where you would vote again.
Yeah.
That might be more effective than trying to have the legislature put one together, or to consistently reject plans being put forth by the commission without giving them an explanation on why. So that
So we can say, you could have the commission come back here and chair our one of our come back and present that and have a conversation with them, offer recommendations and make it move forward, and we can go off that number.
So my recommendation have to be an amendment.
Amendment, or we do a work session, it could be a recommendation.
Yep. It would be advantageous and recommended to try to get the commission to work with you to develop a plan so that you are in the end voting and approving on a commission plan, which eliminates the question, well, who gave you the power to act? I'll just raise a corollary that when the New York State Legislature picked up the task of drawing the state's congressional and state legislative map in 2022, the reason the court struck it down was because the state constitution delineated that the state commission was required to submit a first set of maps, which could be voted down. That's just what happened. But when the second set of maps needed to be submitted by the commission to the legislature, the commission basically imploded and disappeared. And the legislature, using common sense and precedent, drew the map itself. But the state courts of 2 years ago said, fine, but the state constitution doesn't let you draw the map until you have rejected 2 maps from the commission. So we're dealing with a gray area here, but it would always be better to get a map submitted by the commission, even though the city charter is silent about resubmitting and resubmitting. It's just cleaner, and there's no precedent that I'm aware of to fall back on. So we're really in a gray area here.
I'll just make two comments. One comment is that the commission created 3 alternative plans. One was selected, I think Alicia thought it was best based on her opinion and application, again, through the political process, but there were 2 other options based on the map and all the other criteria that the commission presented. I will also note that as a practical matter, it's not just drawing a map on pretty pictures and color-coded maps. Once that map was created, Alicia brought me in. I mean, I was involved, but as far as the nitty-gritty drawing of the boundary lines, it's like a meets and bounds description from a deed, where you go from parcel, from point of commencement, and you work your way around the city. It's a heavy lift to draw those ward boundaries. No one really reads the content of the boundary, but this is the heart of it. It's the ward line commencing at a point, working around. So there needs to be a level of recognition of the work effort that goes into drawing maps. It's not just plotting stuff on a picture. It's actually the legal description that was the most specific, but the most time-consuming of that process.
Yeah, well,
That's where the frustration comes in from my perspective, because it was hours of time to kind of try to get this 100%, but I don't think that was recognized, and certainly Alicia spent a heck of a lot more time than I did. But there's a lot of effort to get into that description.
Yeah, there were a lot of options. The options that they gave were almost all 3 were just about identical. So there really wasn't, and we didn't get presented with these choices, but I got it from the Board of Elections, the 3 choices that were there. They were almost identical, so there were really choices.
And that's not intentional. That's because the wards are existing. There's not a huge population. The city is a bunch of blocks. There's not many options.
I'm very familiar with how that works. Yeah.
I'm saying you're not going to get. You could reinvent this process 100 times over, and I don't know what the numbers are going to show, but it's not going to show a big difference from what you have because you have to do the math. So my suggestion would be, if anyone's asking, let's not restart the process, because a lot of that heavy lifting of the analysis has been done. If there's tinkering, by all means, let's address those concerns, but to start over seems nonsensical, and it sounds like we can't, either way, we're beyond the deadline for 2024, so let's do this tinkering now, get a final product that everyone agrees upon, put it into a final format, so we're not creating 3
And that's what I was
just
suggesting.
delays, and then make it effective in 2025.
And I appreciate you saying that, and this is outside of you all, but thank you for being here in the sense of giving us the options and having that conversation so we can tinker with it. I'm suggesting a work session. It could be a formal council where we make amendments. One of those 2 things have to happen, but I do have to say, because I know it's been lost in the conversation, I fundamentally disagree with changing the wards, because it was. I looking at Ward 2, my predecessor would never have been elected in Ward 2 in the last 15 years on that, and that's changing representation of Ward 2. And I know I'm looking at it just on that end, but I would say that it did fundamentally some change aspects of it. So I do disagree with that concept, but I do think we need to move forward for 2025. We need to, my suggestion is a work session so we can have a less formal conversation. Talk about our issues with it, like we did with Alicia.
Well,
And then have a formal law on there so we can actually have a vote and make amendments as.
The rush aspect of it is difficult, so I can understand that part of it, and yes, no one wants to be rushing through a decision. So taking away that pressure, putting a pressure relief valve by not having it due by February 15th should be helpful, but to start over seems inefficient and not a good use of anyone's time.
Yeah, well, I'd like to follow up on Councilor Avery. The ward that was the closest to being the correct number of all 6 wards was the one that was most people moved out of and moved into. It was only 95 voters away from being correct. But yet it was the one that was maneuvered the most. It kind of made it look like someone was gerrymandering something up there. But,
I mean, that's a heavy term to say gerrymandering when you were talking.
well, we didn't have a Republican on the
Well, that was,
committee. That was,
yeah, the council-driven committee, and no one was selected, no one was found. Not many Republicans in the city.
but anyway, the worst case, by default, we go and the court will draw that for us. And that would
That's
be.
a random lawsuit.
Yeah, that's only gonna happen if the lawsuit, it triggers. a
Well, no, I think if we don't agree on it.
That's not what he said.
Okay,
We
well-
need a lawsuit filed against us to trigger the Supreme Court stepping in.
No, not the Supreme Court, not the Supreme
It's
Court.
the state
Yeah,
Supreme Court.
state Supreme Court.
Well, what would happen if we couldn't agree? Jeffrey?
Nothing
If you
until-
can't, if you can't agree on the map whatsoever, and if somebody brings a lawsuit, the court will give you every opportunity within its power to go back and try again. But failing that, then the court would step in and draw the map itself.
Yeah, and to add to what Jeffrey just said, in a lot of previous cases, what has happened is that they'll hire an expert or multiple experts, for example, someone like Professor Weiss, and they will make a suggestion based on what the current population is and looking at all of the data. But they'll also allow other people to submit. So you might have two maps that are submitted by Republican parties, one submitted by the Democratic Party, one from the commission, and then one recommended by experts. And then the court would review all of that information and then make the final judgment on which one
But
would make most
but
sense.
a court, I've never seen a court overrule or go against what the master, him or herself, has decided. The court trusts the individual that it hires to review, as Alexis just said, review plans. In the New York process in the spring of 2022, the state court master received thousands of public comments, held a very lengthy public hearing where people drove 5 hours or more to be there. So they had an extensive public input process. The parties in the legislature submitted plans and whatnot, but when pushed, when it gets down to it, the master, him or herself, will draw the map, and barring inaccuracies or technical mistakes in the map, the court will inevitably go with whatever the master they hired to do. In 2012, after the state assembly and state senate failed to agree on the 2012 congressional map, a federal court hired a special master who drew a map. They held a public hearing on the map. They discovered some technical problems with it. Some amendments were made, but the map that was used for the 2012 through 2020 elections was one drawn by a special master for the federal court.
Just to make a clear distinction here, we're a relatively small city, that this is not a Republican versus Democrat fight. This is just, we gotta go through the process kind of thing. It's not, I don't envision two competing parties challenging this here. This is just the council, we just gotta put it over the finish line.
Yeah, the state criteria also prevents a plan from favoring or disfavoring political parties or candidates. That's what got the state legislature into trouble over the congressional plan. It was perceived by the court, whether it was right or wrong, as partisan gerrymandering. So you really can't draw a map that's going to favor one party over another, or favor one incumbent over another, or favoring or damaging a challenger as well.
Right, and you can't district somebody out of their ward, correct?
Only if the population requirements dictate that. If somebody lives right at the border of a district and the geography is such that there's no other place to go, you might have no choice. If you purposefully go after an incumbent, that's a problem. But if the incumbent lives next to the river and there's no place to go, and the population shifts are big enough that you can't move a block north, south, east, or west, yeah, then the incumbent gets dislodged, but you can't do anything about that.
When would this need to be, when would this need to be passed so that our local Board of Elections would be able to adjust voting boundaries for the 2025 election? Because
I usually recommend enacting a plan at least 2-3 weeks before petitioning starts so that the county or Board of Elections can get its ducks in order to get everything ready with election districts, candidate petitioning, administrative issues. But it's generally best to ask them how much time would you like without giving them too much time.
Okay.
That rarely ever happens. If you notice, last week, the legislature enacted a plan one day before it went into effect.
Okay, so I just want to ask one final thing. Just want to be clear before we hang up, because I know it's getting close to 6 o'clock now. Do we need to vote on the proposed law? We never voted on it. Do we need to vote on that and reject it in order to trigger the next part of the process? Or can we decide what our next steps are going to be right now, even though we never voted on it?
It would be on the safe side to, by resolution, ask the commission to resubmit or to submit a map. Any positive step that you can show that you're trying to make progress can never hurt.
Okay, so if we ask the mayor to resubmit the local law and the existing map that the commission created, and we voted no, and then as a council, a governing body, we said we would like to meet with the districting commission to come up with our amendments, that would be a proper procedure.
I would suggest that. I see that as a positive step. It shows you're doing something, that you're making progress, that a court need not yet intervene should a voter challenge this whole situation.
Okay.
I agree with Councilor Gibbs on the potential timeline for that. So thank you for that clarification. A follow-up question, looking at, you're saying a few weeks, so that would potentially put us at end of January. I'm throwing that number out there. Would you recommend doing it after?
This year, we're going to do this.
Well, that's what I want to do it this year, is what I want to get. Would you suggest doing it after the general election or after we know who candidates are, so it doesn't become political? I know I'm asking, I guess, a political question.
Well, you want to keep the candidates out of this. Do this when there's the least tumult, when there's the least distraction. And it might be best to do that after this November's election so that there are no sideshows.
So we could do it in November, staying.
But you're going to be bouncing up with the same conundrum from last year then. That's the same time frames we were under 2023.
Yeah.
We were never given any inclination. We had to go to the Board of Elections to find out that there were proposed plans.
If you start the process in November with the.
No, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying start the process in November.
Through the process, okay, I would just
Yeah.
start the process in November, because that's.
No,
the
wait,
long level.
We should start that.
We should be voting in November.
Sure.
In November.
Yes, I agree.
If, just plain devil's advocate, if you have a plan done by, let's say, January 2024, I'm sorry, let's see, this is 2024, next year, yeah, you want to have something ready so that if you have elections next year, you're in place to do so. In other words, even if a court steps in and says you're going to have a special election in 2025, you want to have a map approved by sometime in early February, because petitioning usually starts at the end of February each year.
Yes, I'm envisioning that we will not wait that long. I'm envisioning that we work on it and have it ready to vote on after the November election date. So basically this fall. So it doesn't interfere with the election of 2024, and it's in place far ahead of the 2025 election and will be in compliance with the law. That's what I'm envisioning. Does council feel the same way?
Absolutely.
I agree.
It seems to be the best thing.
That would be the best route to take at this point in time. It's like, I can't tell you, you waited, 2 years went by, you didn't do this. Simply, we're being realistic that it's now March 2024. What do you do? I think what you're discussing now is realistic and positive.
I just want to say thank you to both Jeffrey and Alexis for coming tonight. This was incredibly helpful and informative, and I realize you took time out of your evening to do this, and I just want to thank you so much for all of
Well,
your
you're
help.
welcome, and I'd be glad to revisit once you either want to get an idea of how criteria work with each other, because they are prioritized criteria. Once you achieve population equality, then you look to minority voting strength, then you look to compactness, contiguity, community of interest, incumbency, all these different issues. So if you want to get together again sometime later this year, and then to get my input on the actual map itself, I'd be glad to do that.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate that.
Okay.
And on another front, I kind of have become the center's, or I would say, expert on the New York Voting Rights Act that went into effect in June 2022, which sets forth what all of the steps that a petitioner would take if they wanted to sue. So if you guys aren't super familiar with that law yet, and you have any questions about what that process would look like if someone did bring a lawsuit, definitely reach out to me. I'd even be happy to do a Zoom in the future and fully explain it.
Let me just mention on that note, so I didn't bring it up because I didn't think it was really relevant, but New York has a new state voting rights act that if you have a minority community, meaning Black, Hispanic, Asian, and that community represents about 10-15% of a district's population. And if minority candidates have been unable to get elected to office, then under this new state law, they can challenge you to take steps to rectify that problem. That is generally a problem in areas where you have at-large boards, town boards that might have 4 or 5 members where they're all elected at large and the minority voters don't get an opportunity to weigh in and elect a preferred candidate. But it's just worth mentioning that there is a law out there. I'm doubting it applies since you are all elected for the most part, if not all of you, by single member districts, that it probably won't apply, but it's just something to be cognizant of. And if you would like more information on that, and this really would come up when you're actually line drawing, when you're drawing districts, we should revisit the issue.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Jeffrey. It was very informative and.
My pleasure.
Alexis, we appreciate that.
Okay, so let's stay in touch.
Thank you, we will.
Okay, I'm going to sign off.
Thank you.
Okay, good night.